Now imagine this, you're working your shift at a fancy golf course thinking you're in control. But what happens when a man, dressed like he doesn't belong, walks right onto your turf, and tells you he's the owner? That's exactly what happens when Clint Eastwood faces a stubborn worker who won't back down. Trust me, you won't believe how this heated standoff ends. Stick around to see who really calls the shots. This is one you don't want to miss. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching this from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more. The sun was beginning to dip behind the rolling hills, casting long golden shadows over the perfectly manicured fairways of the exclusive golf course. The air was still, filled with the smell of freshly cut grass and the faint scent of cologne from the well-dressed golfers who strolled about, their soft laughter floating in the air. The course itself felt like a world apart, quiet, serene, and guarded by an unspoken aura of wealth and privilege. Clint Eastwood's boots made a soft thud against the smooth cobblestone path that led to the main building. His steps were steady, but there was something about the way he moved that suggested a man who'd seen more than his fair share of confrontations. He didn't belong here, not in this perfect world of tailored clothes and meticulous detail. His worn leather jacket creaked as he adjusted his posture, a stark contrast to the polo shirts and khakis around him. His face, mostly obscured by a pair of dark sunglasses, exuded an unshakable confidence that seemed out of place among the polished surroundings. He paused for a moment at the entrance, standing still as if he were absorbing the atmosphere. His sharp eyes scanned the gates, the towering trees, and the perfectly aligned hedges. Everything about this place screamed exclusivity. The signs at the entrance, the carefully positioned statues, the perfectly manicured lawn, it was all a testament to a world that expected certain people and excluded others. A few of the well-dressed golfers eyed him from a distance, their gazes lingering with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They didn't seem to approve of the rugged outsider strolling onto their turf. Clint barely noticed them. He was lost in his own thoughts, evaluating the place, no doubt sizing up everything from the layout to the tone of the people who walked these grounds. Just as he was about to take another step, the sound of fast-moving footsteps interrupted his musings. The worker appeared from behind a cluster of bushes, moving with purpose. His face was taut with professionalism, and he wore a uniform that looked as though it had never seen a wrinkle. He was in his mid-30s, and his eyes held the type of authority that came from years of ensuring no one crossed the line. "Excuse me, sir," the worker called out, his voice cutting through the stillness of the air. It was firm, unwavering, and already carrying a hint of frustration. "This is private property. You can't just wander onto the grounds like this. You'll have to leave." Clint turned slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. A flicker of a smile tugged at the corner of his lips, but it wasn't a friendly gesture. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement, as if he were recognizing an inevitable interaction. He didn't seem bothered, not in the least. "I didn't realize," Clint responded, his voice smooth and calm. "Maybe I missed the sign." The worker didn't appreciate the nonchalant tone. His jaw tightened and his posture straightened even more. "I'm serious. You need to go. Now." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. It was clear the worker wasn't going to let this go. Clint, however, remained unfazed, standing his ground without so much as a shift in his stance. The tension between them was already palpable. An unspoken standoff had begun, and neither of them seemed willing to back down just yet. Clint didn't budge. His boots were firmly planted on the ground as he studied the worker. The look in Clint's eyes was direct, unwavering, as if he were carefully measuring the man standing before him. The worker, despite his obvious discomfort, didn't flinch. His stance was rigid, his muscles tensed, ready for any confrontation. Clint took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. The golf course worker's chest rose with a sharp breath, but he didn't back away. "Don't you think you're being a little harsh?" Clint asked, his voice low but calm, too calm. There was no sign of aggression, just a cool tone that made the worker hesitate, unsure of how to react. "I'm just doing my job," the worker shot back, his voice growing firmer. His hands were now clenched at his sides, visibly shaking from the tension of the moment. "You're trespassing and I don't care who you are. You need to leave or I'll have to take it up with someone higher up." Clint's lips curled into a subtle smirk as he stepped even closer, his eyes never leaving the worker's. The worker's jaw clenched and his eyes widened, trying to match Clint's cold stare. "Seems like you've got quite the sense of entitlement, huh?" Clint mused, his voice laced with just the right touch of sarcasm. "Or maybe you're just overcompensating for something." The worker's face hardened, a wave of anger creeping up his neck. His eyes flicked to Clint's face, his fists tightening even more at his sides. "What's your name?" The worker's voice was a little too sharp, a little too eager. "I'll call security if I have to. I won't stand here and let you make a fool of me." Clint gave a small knowing shake of his head. "Go ahead. Call them. I'm sure they'll be real impressed with your attitude," he said flatly. His voice carried the weight of someone who had nothing to prove, someone who knew this game all too well. There was a long pause, thick with tension. The worker's face flushed red. Every inch of him wanted to escalate the situation, but Clint's calmness seemed to hold him in place, testing his will. It wasn't just the authority that Clint seemed to exude, it was the way he carried himself. A man used to being in control no matter where he was or who he faced. The worker's eyes narrowed. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, his heart racing as his frustration grew. He leaned in a fraction closer, his voice dropping, laced with both anger and desperation. "You think you can just waltz in here and get away with it?" He spat, his breath shallow. "No one's above the rules, not even you." Clint didn't flinch. He simply held the worker's gaze, his expression unreadable. The unspoken challenge was there. Clint wasn't here to back down. The worker's words had crossed a line, but Clint wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of reacting the way he expected. This wasn't about authority, it was about power, and Clint knew exactly how to wield it. The worker, still trying to assert himself, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was caught between his duties and his emotions, and Clint's unshakable calm only made it worse. The confrontation had reached its boiling point. The air between them was thick with raw energy, the kind that crackled when two people refused to give an inch. The worker's voice trembled, his frustration finally spilling over as his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I don't know who you think you are," the worker barked, his tone now shaky, "but I'm telling you, you're on my turf now. You don't have the right to." Clint didn't flinch. His posture didn't change. His cold, calculating eyes never left the worker's face. He was unfazed by the worker's growing rage, taking a moment to let the words sink in. The silence between them stretched on just long enough to make the worker sweat, his breath coming faster, his eyes darting between Clint and the ground. Clint was playing a game, and he knew how to win it. Finally, Clint spoke, his voice low and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "I am the owner of this place. So, yeah, I think I can do whatever I damn well please." The words hit the worker like a slap in the face. He froze. His mouth hung open, unable to process the statement. His hands trembled slightly as he took a step back, eyes widening in disbelief. He glanced around the course as if the very ground beneath his feet might suddenly change its form to match the revelation. Are you kidding me?" the worker stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The owner? You don't look like the owner." The words hung in the air and Clint's expression didn't waver. He wasn't here to justify himself. He didn't need to explain a damn thing to anyone. His reputation, his very presence said it all. "Looks can be deceiving," Clint replied flatly, the corners of his lips barely twitching in the faintest hint of a smile. The worker took a half step back, his eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to reconcile the man standing in front of him with the image of what he imagined the owner of this place would be. The wealthy, polished individual who would fit in seamlessly with the members of this exclusive club. Clint didn't fit that image, and yet here he was. The worker's confidence, built on the assumption that he held all the power in this situation, crumbled before him. I don't," the worker's words faltered as a mix of confusion and panic crept into his expression. You can't be serious. You're telling me, you own this place? The whole damn course." Clint stood there, unmoved, watching as the worker grappled with the reality of the situation. Every second that passed made the worker's doubt grow deeper, his disbelief more pronounced. He wanted to argue, to dismiss it, but Clint's unshakable calm and the weight of his words left him with no ground to stand on. For a moment, the worker stood there, dumbfounded, as if he were waiting for someone else to step in and put an end to the absurdity of the claim. But no one came. The other golfers continued their rounds, oblivious to the power struggle playing out before them. Finally, Clint spoke again, his voice cool and controlled. "You still think you can kick me off this property? You've got your work cut out for you, kid." The worker's composure was cracking. His face was flushed, his chest heaving as if he were struggling to keep his emotions in check. His eyes darted nervously around the course, looking for someone, anyone, to come to his aid, to back up his authority. But the rest of the golfers were oblivious, going about their rounds, and the worker was alone in this battle. The silence felt deafening as Clint remained unmoved, his stance unshaken. Clint's mere presence radiated a quiet, almost eerie authority, like a mountain that couldn't be moved by the wind. "You're trying to pull a prank or something?" the worker barked, his voice cracking with frustration and irritation. "Is this some kind of sick joke? You just waltz in here, act like you own the place, and I'm supposed to roll over?" Clint's lips curled upward in the faintest, almost imperceptible smile as he chuckled softly, shaking his head. His hands remained casually at his sides, his eyes never leaving the workers. "You think this is a joke?" Clint asked, his voice low and steady, carrying an almost mocking tone. "I'm telling you, I've got the paperwork to prove it." He paused for a beat, watching as the worker's fists clenched tighter, the anger radiating off him. "But if you want to keep fighting about it, I'm not going to stop you." The worker's eyes widened in disbelief, his frustration now morphing into pure rage. His hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear, it was from the sheer intensity of his anger. This man, who looked like he had no place in this world, was challenging everything the worker stood for. The worker was already on edge, and Clint's calm demeanor only pushed him further to the brink. "I don't care if you're the damn president of the United States," the worker spat, his voice now an angry hiss. "I'm telling you, you need to leave. Now." Clint's eyes darkened, the briefest flash of something dangerous flickering behind them. His jaw clenched as he took a step closer to the worker, his body language suddenly exuding an even more powerful presence. "You might want to watch your tone," Clint said, his voice carrying a sharp edge. His words were slow, deliberate, every syllable measured. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. But the worker, emboldened by his own anger and the belief that he was still in control, didn't seem to care. He took a step forward, puffing out his chest as if trying to make himself appear even more imposing. "Watch your tone, buddy," the worker snapped, his eyes narrowing with defiance. "You're not above the rules here. No one is. Not even you." Clint's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes deepened, as if he were assessing the worker, sizing him up for what was coming next. There was no rush in Clint's movements, everything he did was slow, deliberate. But with every word the worker threw at him, Clint's power, his control, seemed to grow. The worker was playing a dangerous game. He was so convinced of his own authority, so sure that he could push Clint around with a few words, that he didn't realize he was standing on the edge of a precipice. And Clint wasn't about to let him fall without a little nudge. The air between them crackled with intensity, thick with the unspoken weight of the confrontation. Every second felt like a slow burn, the silence almost unbearable as the worker's face twisted between anger and panic. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the muscles in his jaw twitched involuntarily. He could feel it, the grip of fear tightening around him. His job was slipping away with every word, every action that he couldn't take back. That panic was fueling his words, making them come out sharper, more desperate. But Clint, still as a statue, remained unmoved. He was like a rock, unyielding, unbothered by the worker's emotional storm. His presence alone was enough to make the worker feel small, like a wave crashing against the shore and finding no purchase. Clint's steady gaze never faltered, his demeanor an unshakable force of nature. "I don't like being disrespected," Clint said, his voice low, calm, and lethal in its precision. "Especially when I'm on my own property." The worker swallowed hard, the words sinking deep into him. He took an instinctive step back, his posture suddenly less confident, more uncertain. He was starting to see the reality of the situation, but it wasn't something he was ready to accept just yet. "So," the worker stammered, his voice suddenly lacking the earlier conviction. "So, you're really serious? You own this place?" Clint gave a slow, deliberate nod, never breaking eye contact. His face remained impassive, but the unspoken weight behind the gesture was enough to make the worker's blood run cold. "I'm deadly serious," Clint said, each word punctuated with quiet authority. "Now, if you want to keep making a scene, be my guest. But know this, you're not going to win this one." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the worker's breathing, ragged and uneven. A long, pregnant silence passed between them, heavy with the realization that the power balance had shifted entirely. Clint had taken control of the situation, and the worker could do nothing to reclaim it. The worker's defiance had all but evaporated. His bravado, his earlier posturing, had deflated completely. He seemed to shrink under Clint's unwavering gaze, his body language folding inward, as if the weight of his mistake was now too much to bear. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, He'd crossed a line and now there was no way back. He'd misjudged Clint, miscalculated everything. Clint, still as calm as ever, watched the worker crumble. There was no satisfaction in Clint's eyes, no gloating. He didn't need to rub it in. The worker knew he was beaten. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, as Clint allowed the worker to stew in his own realization. There was nothing more to say. Nothing more to do. Clint had made his point, and it had been made clear beyond any shadow of doubt. The worker stood there, frozen, staring at Clint as he walked away. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was completely speechless, trapped in the heavy realization of what had just happened. Everything he had said, every insult, every accusation, now seemed so small, so insignificant, in the face of Clint's unshakable calm and the revelation of his power. His earlier bravado, his belief that he could control the situation, had crumbled in an instant. The full weight of Clint's words hit him all at once, like a flood breaking through a dam. The worker had misjudged everything, from Clint's motives to his tolerance for disrespect, and now it was too late to take it back. His stomach churned with the realization that he had just insulted the owner of the entire property, the one person whose approval he needed most. And there was nothing he could do to undo the damage. Clint, still as composed as ever, gave the worker a final, piercing glance. His eyes locked onto the worker's, and for a split second, the worker could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. There was no anger in Clint's gaze, no satisfaction, just a quiet, cold warning. "I'm going to let you cool off," Clint said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had been present throughout the entire exchange. "Maybe take a walk." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But remember this next time you decide who gets to be on this course and who doesn't." With that, Clint turned and began walking away, his boots clicking softly against the stone path. Each step was measured, purposeful, as if the scene they had just shared had already been dismissed from his mind. The worker could only stand there, motionless, as Clint's figure disappeared into the distance. The silence that followed felt almost deafening. It was like the entire world had gone quiet, leaving the worker alone with the enormity of what had just unfolded. He was stunned, humbled, his mind racing as he tried to piece together how he had gone from a position of authority to a powerless, humiliated figure. The worker slowly sank onto a nearby bench, his shoulders slumping as he tried to digest the reality of the encounter. His hands rested in his lap, trembling ever so slightly as he reflected on what had just transpired. How had it all gone so wrong? How had he let his pride and anger blind him to the truth standing right in front of him? He had no idea how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. He had insulted the owner of the golf course, the very person who held the power to make or break him. The worker's mind spun with thoughts of how this could affect his job, his reputation, his future. Would Clint report him? Would he lose his position here? But as Clint's figure faded into the distance, one thing became painfully clear. Things were going to change around here. The worker had no illusions anymore. The world he had once navigated with confidence was no longer as simple as it seemed. Clint had made it clear that respect wasn't something to be taken lightly. And the worker knew that he would think twice, no, 10 times, before ever treating anyone with the same disrespect again. He had learned the hard way that some people couldn't be pushed, that some lines shouldn't be crossed. He sat there for a while, the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him. The once proud man who had sought to assert his dominance now found himself humbled, uncertain of what to do next. All he could do was watch as Clint's footsteps faded, carrying with them the lesson of the day.